Today's lesson is on chapter 3.3. Corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent. So let's take a look at what that means. It's right here in our little box here. Corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent. So it says here, if two figures are congruent, then corresponding sides are congruent and corresponding angles are congruent. What does that mean? Let me show you. Right here it says triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. So what all this is saying is this: if these two triangles are congruent, that means that angle A has to equal angle D. Angle B has to equal angle E. And angle C has to equal angle F. Now let's look at the sides. And by the way, what I was just doing there is the first letter goes with the first letter. The second letter corresponds to the second letter. The third corresponds to the third. So that means that the angles of those letters have to be equal. Angle A with angle D, angle B with angle E, and angle C with angle F. Now if we look at the sides, okay, let's look at the first two letters. Side AB, let me try that again. Side AB. So the first two letters correspond to the first two letters in this one, DE. So that means that side AB, this one right here, has to measure the same amount as side DE, this one right here. Alright, those two sides, AB and DE, have to measure the same amount. What else? Okay, let's do the second and the third with the second and the third. Side BC has to measure the same amount as side EF. BC, which is this one, let me put two lines so that we can differentiate, and it's green now. So side BC has to measure the same amount as side EF. And then the last one is that we haven't done is the first letter with the third letter and the first letter with the third letter. So side AC has to measure the same amount as side DF. Side AC has to measure the same amount as side DF. Okay, very simple. So the questions at the beginning are very easy. They want us to first find the measure of side DE. Find the measure of side DE. So if you look over here, when you go to see side DE, there's no number there. Alright, so from this picture, from this triangle, we don't know how long side DE is. However, since up here, it tells us that, and let me erase all that. Since up here it tells us that side DE corresponds to side AB, and the two shapes are congruent, that means they got to measure the same amount. So DE has to be the same as AB, and it says here that AB is 2.6 centimeters. So therefore, DE is also 2.6 centimeters. Now don't get excited because the questions are not going to be that easy most of the time. Okay, but this is an example of all you have to do is look at the other one and get the exact same measurement and realize that it applies to this one as well. Now in letter B, we're doing the same thing, but they want us to find the measure of angle B. So here's angle B, and there's no degrees there, so I don't know how much it measures. But up here, it tells me that the two triangles are congruent and that angle B corresponds to angle E. Well, if I look at angle E in the other triangle, it's 65 degrees. So there's my answer. The measure of angle B is going to be 65 degrees because it has to equal the measure of angle E. They're both congruent. Let's look at another example. Okay, so again on the top it tells us that the two triangles are congruent. And remember, the order of the letters is very important because it tells us which side corresponds with which side, which angle with which angle, etc. So question 4, we got to find out what's the measure of side SU. Okay, so what is the measure of side SU? We're looking for this. What is the measure of side SU? This side right here. Okay, so SU is the first and the third letter. So it has to correspond to the first and the third letter in the other triangle. Side VX, VX. Side VX is this one right here. Here's side VX. And since it tells us that that side is 43 feet, that means that this side must also be 43 feet. And there's my answer. Again, they're not all going to be this easy. But that's my first answer for number 4, 43 feet. Now number 5 is similar. They want us to find the measure of angle S. Angle S is that's the first letter in this triangle STU. Here's angle S. There's nothing written there, but it corresponds to angle V, the first letter of the other triangle. Angle V. Right here it tells us it's 38 degrees. And there's my answer. The measure of angle S is 38 degrees. Couple of similar problems. Let's just look at them real quickly. Again, here it's giving us the important information that we need before we begin to know what letter corresponds with what letter, what side with what side, what angle with what angle. All right, so first thing, excuse me. First thing we got to find is the measure of side JH. JH. JH is right here. Okay, so JH. Now look at the order. JH is the third and the second letter of this one. The third and the second. So it goes with the third and the second of this one. Side FE. Side FE. Side FE is 31 feet. So therefore this one also has to be 31 feet. So let me write it here. Again, JH is the third and the second letter. So it has to correspond to the third and the second letter in this one, which is FE. And when I look at the picture, I see that side FE is 31 feet. So therefore, side JH is also 31 feet. Now number 3, they want us to find the measure of angle D. The measure of angle D. D is the first letter. There's nothing there. So I can look at the first letter of the other triangle, angle G, which is 43 degrees. There's my answer. Number 4, same thing. Here they tell us that the shapes are congruent. We got to find the measure of angle R. R is the third letter. Okay, there's nothing written here for the measure of angle R. R is the third letter. It corresponds to angle M in the other shape. So angle M is 79 degrees. So therefore the measure of angle R is 79 degrees. And last one, number 5, PS, side PS. That's the first and the fourth letter. So they correspond to the first and the fourth letter in this one, KN. So if you look right here on this shape, side KN is 2.1 centimeters. So there's my answer. Again, they're not all going to be that easy. Enjoy it while it's that easy. In a second, we're going to use a lot of algebra. All right, moving on to the next example. And those are my answers. Okay, now we're basically going to be doing the same thing except with algebra. They're going to give you algebraic expressions. They're going to give us algebraic expressions. Before we look at this though, let's take a look at what's up here because it's going to come up throughout the year. And it's simple. I just got to go over it, but it looks, don't let the looks fool you. It's simple. So right here we have 3 properties of congruence, which we'll look at in a second. Okay, now coming up today, you're gonna have the first proofs that we've done in this class. I kind of mentioned them earlier in the year. There was a section that I skipped over that had a few proofs. I'm gonna go back to hopefully next week. But today is the first time that you guys with me are gonna look at proofs. Now for proofs, you're going to need different rules that you're going to have to use to justify certain things, including these properties. They may come up. So let's look at them real quick, and then later on in this lesson, when I have actual examples that use them, I'll show you how they're used, and you'll get a better idea of how they're used. Okay, first of all, the reflexive property of congruence. Reflexive property of congruence. A segment is congruent to itself. A segment is congruent to that same segment. Right now, you're probably like, I don't get it. That's common sense. You're right. It is common sense. When we get to a problem, I'll show you when it's used. But that's the reflexive property. Believe it or not, this one gets used a lot throughout the year. It's very simple, but just remember, whenever they put the same segment is congruent to the same segment, it's the reflexive property. Reflexive property. You can kind of think of the word reflection, but reflexive property of congruence. Okay, the next one, I don't see it used that much, but let's just look at it anyways. The symmetric property of congruence. So if segment AB is congruent to segment CD, then segment CD has to be congruent to segment AB. Again, I realize that's common sense. When they come up, you'll get a better feel of when we use them. Okay, let's look at the last one, because this one does come up a lot. It comes up today, and it's simple, but I feel like sometimes students don't see it, even though it's simple. The transitive property of congruence. So let's look at this. It says if AB, and this one, let me use like different colors to show you what I'm trying to say. First, let's read it. If segment AB is congruent to segment CD, and segment CD is congruent to segment EF, then that means that segment AB is congruent to EF. So look here a second. Look what I'm underlining in red, and look at what I'm underlining in blue. You know what? Let me use a different color. I'm sorry. Let me put this one in red. Let's put this one in this pink color, just because you could see it well on screen, and the middle one's in blue. Okay, so look, basically what they're saying, and let me choose one more color. I don't know, black. Okay, if AB is congruent to CD and CD is congruent to EF, that means this one right here has to be congruent to this one over here, because they're both congruent to the same one. You're going to see that a lot. Learn to recognize that pattern. You're going to see it today in a moment. So if segment AB is congruent to segment CD, and that one, segment CD, is congruent to another one, segment EF, then the first one has to be congruent to the last one, which is what they wrote right here. That is the transitive property. Sometimes they'll mix up this order. You'll see it when it comes up, but sometimes they'll mix up that order to try to confuse you, but you got to realize that that is a transitive property. Okay, for now, let's set that aside. I'm going to do these examples, and all of this will come up in a few slides from now. So let's look at example 2a, where we got to find, first of all, here on the top, they're telling us that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. They want us to find the measure of segment AB. So we look up here, here's segment AB. Now here they do give us information. They tell us that segment AB is 3x plus 8 inches. But what the question is asking us is how much does it measure in numbers? I know the answer is there, but let's look at it. Okay, now keep in mind that segment AB, which is the first and the second letter, is congruent to segment DE, the first and the second letter in the other triangle, which is this one. Congruent means that the two sides their length has to be equal. They have to be equal in length. So therefore, look how I'm going to set up my equation to figure out the answer. Segment AB, you don't have to write this part right here. I'm just writing it so that we're on the same page. Segment AB has to be congruent to segment DE, right? So if 3x plus 8 equals 5x, okay, look how I set up my equation. Now I'm going to use my algebra skills to solve for x. I'm going to get all the x's on one side. You could move either 5x to the left or 3x to the right. I prefer to move it to the side where the coefficient of x, that means the number in front, will stay positive. So this will give me 2x equals 8. I'm running out of space, but x is going to equal 8 divided by 2. So x is going to equal 4. Oh, and I almost forgot. X equals 4, but that's not the question. I'm glad. See, it almost happened to me. You always got to make sure you check out what are they asking me. They did not ask you what does x equal. The question is what does AB equal. Okay, so now I got to substitute right there. I got to put, if x equals 4, I got to do 3 times 4 plus 8 to get my answer. I always follow PEMDAS, the order of operations. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division from left to right. addition and subtraction from left to right. So right here, first I got to multiply. 3 times 4 is 12, and then 12 plus 8 will give me my final answer, which is 20. And that's what it says right here. That's the answer. It's really just basic algebra and just setting up the equation the right way. Let's look at letter B because it's similar. Alright, in letter B, we got to find the measure of angle D, like David. Alright, here's angle D. Okay, they tell us it's 6y plus 2 degrees. 6y plus 2 degrees. Okay, now angle D has to be congruent or equal to angle A. And angle A, it says over here, is 5y plus 11. So since the measure of angle A has to equal the measure of angle D. Alright, again, you don't have to write this part. I'm just showing you right here. I'm going to put, okay, the measure of angle A is 5y plus 11. This part I would think you have to write it out. I have to write it out, so I would assume you do as well. Okay, the measure of angle D is 6y plus 2. Now we got to get all the like terms on one side, all the variables on one side, all the numbers without a variable to the other side. Again, you could move it to whatever side you want, but I prefer to move the term with the variable to the side where the coefficient, that's the number in front of y, where the coefficient will stay positive. I think that makes it less work and easier to comprehend what's happening. So this is going to give me 1y, but I don't write the 1. So if I move the y to the right, I got to move this 2 to the left of the equation by subtracting 2 to both sides. 11 minus 2 is 9. Okay, so y equals 9. However, let me write it over here because we're doing letter B. Y equals 9. However, the question was not, what does y equal? The question was, what is the measure of angle D? That's what they're asking me. So since the measure of angle D is 6y plus 2, 6y plus 2, I got to substitute the 9 where the y goes. Hopefully you have your timetables memorized. You should. 9 times 6 is 54. And 54 plus 2 will give me my answer, which is 56 degrees. This chapter is good for refreshing your algebra skills because you're going to use them throughout the whole year and they're super important. Okay, next slide. Similar examples here that we'll go through. Okay, so again at the beginning it tells us quadrilateral GHJK is congruent to quadrilateral LMNP. So we got to find the given side length or angle measure. They want us to find the measure of side LM. LM is right here. Here's LM, which is this. Okay, now LM, that's the first and the second letter, so it corresponds to the first and the second letter here, which is GH. GH, which is this side. So I'm going to make both of those equal to each other in order to solve. So 4x plus 3 has to equal 6x minus 13. I'm going to get 4x, I'm going to move it to the right side of the equation. That's going to give me 2x. And the minus 13, I'm going to move it to the left side of the equation. That's going to give me 16. So x equals 16 divided by 2. So x is going to equal 8. However, that was not the question. The question is, what does LM equal? So now I got to substitute. Okay, I got to substitute x equals 8 right here. Okay, so it's going to be 6 times 8 minus 13. I follow the order of operations and multiply before I subtract. 6 times 8 is 48. And now I got to do 48 minus 13, which is going to give me my final answer of 35. So number 6 is 35 centimeters. Let's look at number 7. Alright, number 7, we got to find the measure of angle H. Angle H, it says here, is this much, 9y plus 17 degrees. H is the second letter, so it corresponds to the second letter in this one, which is M. Angle M is this much, 11y minus 1. Alright, so they got to equal each other, so that's how I'm going to set up my equation. That's going to allow me to solve for y. Okay, so again, let's get all the variables with the y to the right so that the coefficient stays positive. It's going to give me 2y. I'm going to move this minus 1 to the left by doing plus 1, and that's going to give me 18. So y equals 18 divided by 2. So y equals 9. But again, the question was not what does y equal? The question is what is the measure of angle h? So now I got to substitute y equals 9 right there. Okay, so it's going to be 9 times 9 plus 17. Okay, 9 times 9 you should know is 81. Now I got to do 81 plus 17. So my final answer is going to be 98 degrees. So the measure of angle h is 98 degrees. I think this is the, let's look at this one and then we have one more thing to cover that shouldn't take too much time. Okay, so in this one we got to find the measure of side BC. Alright, so here's BC. BC is the second and the third letter, so it goes with the second and the third letter on this one, UV. UV is this one. Okay, so I'm going to set it up. Make sure you don't confuse these two. Okay, since we're talking about a side, the side is measured in centimeters. This right here is angle B because it's measured in degrees. So don't confuse the two. If it's measured in degrees, it has to be an angle, not a side. So side BC is 6x plus 2. Okay, I'm going to get all the terms with the variable to the left and the ones without a variable to the right. So x equals 5. Now to find out what BC is, I'm going to substitute by plugging in x equals 5 right there for x. So it's going to be 6 times 5 plus 2. That's going to be 32 is the answer. 32 centimeters. Okay, now let's look at number 7. We got to find the measure of angle U. So here's angle U right here. U is the second letter, so it corresponds to the second letter in this one at angle B, which is the one I was talking about. It's right here. So I want to make them equal to each other. Angle B is this one. Again, because it's in degrees. So 3y plus 2. Okay, now I'm going to move 3y to the right by subtracting it. It's going to give me y. And I'm going to move the minus 18 to the left by adding it. So y equals 20. So to find out what the measure of angle U is, I'm going to substitute y equals 20 right there. So it's going to be 4 times 20 minus 18. 4 times 20 is 80. 80 minus 18. I know 80 minus 20 is 60. So minus 18 has to be 62. So the measure of angle U has to be 62 degrees. Okay, moving on. Okay, I'm not going to do these because they're all, I've done enough examples. There are the answers, so if you need any additional examples, here's the work. You could pause the video when you're doing your homework if you need those examples, or you could check out the PowerPoint that I'll upload to our Microsoft Teams page. Okay, these are some easy questions. Let's look at them real quick. All they're asking us is, they're giving us this information at the top, okay? Sorry, didn't mean to do that. They're giving us this information at the top. Okay, and they're asking us, complete the following using a side or angle of triangle STU. By the way, this is, I don't know if you realize it, but this is the transitive property. If this triangle equals this triangle, and triangle PQR equals this other triangle, that means the first one has to equal the last one. So using this information, they want us to say segment GH, the first and the second letter, is congruent to which sides of triangle STU, because we got to complete our answers using a side or angle of triangle STU. So since it's the first and the second letter, and this is all in the same order, it's gotta correspond. It's gotta be congruent to the first and the second letter of this one. so segment ST. Angle J, which is the third letter, has to be congruent to the third letter here, which is angle U. Side GJ, the first and the third letter has to be congruent to the first and the third letter here. I'm sorry, the first and the third letter over here, SU. And by the way, if you're wondering why they used congruent here and here they put equal, I believe this one means, I'm pretty certain, this one's saying that the sides are congruent, and this one means that the length of their sides are equal. That's a minor difference. It's not a big deal. Don't spend too much time thinking about it, but I'm just pointing out why they're putting it slightly different. It's kind of like a silly detail, but I'm just pointing it out. Last one, the measure of angle G equals. So the measure of angle G, that's the first letter here, so it goes with the first letter here, angle S. The measure of angle S. Whoops. There you go. Just to add something more to what I said earlier, sides and angles are congruent, but when you're talking about their measures, you got to put equal. Like the measure of side GJ equals the measure, or the length of side GJ equals the length of side SU. The measure of angle G equals the measure of angle S. Okay, so when you're talking about like their numbers, their length, or how much they actually measure, you use equal. But when you're just talking about their sides and angles, without any numbers, you put congruent. Again, it's not a big deal. They're not going to test you on that. I'm just kind of like pointing it out, what the difference is. Okay, so there are the answers. Okay, now we're almost done. This is the last part. Here's your first proof that you're going to look at. These are like baby proofs. They're very simple. I mean, throughout the whole year, they're going to be pretty simple, to be honest with you. They don't really get hard. But these are like extra simple, just to give you a heads up. Okay, so let's talk about a couple details here, and I'll talk about this. Here is what a proof looks like. It's this part right down here. This is the proof. On the first of all, they give you information. It'll always say this. It'll say given, and it'll give you some information. What this is like given these facts. That's what that means. These are the facts that they're giving you to work with. Whatever they write here is true. Now, given this information, this is what you got to prove. Prove that D is the midpoint of segment BC. So first is the given information, and then they tell you what you got to prove. Now, your proof is always separated into two columns. The first column is statements. The second column is reasons. By the way, these are always going to be multiple choice. So don't sit here and be like, oh my God, I got to remember which is column 1, which is column 2, what do I write? No, you don't have to do any of that. I'm just telling you how it works, but it's always going to be multiple choice. It's going to guide you always to fill in the answers for pretty much all the questions like this. Okay, now let me say something very important. Always, for your first statement, the first thing that you're going to write in a proof is the given information. That's always what goes first. So that's right here, the first thing that they put is triangle ABD is congruent to triangle ACD. That's what they gave you up here. And for the reason, you just put given. It's always like that every time for the whole year. So always whatever they give you at the beginning, that's what you put first. And the reason, you always write the exact same thing, given. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, they're telling us that this triangle is congruent to this triangle. Now, in order to prove that D is the midpoint of BC, let's look at this picture real quick, that D is in the middle of segment BC. Well, if we could show that this side right here measures the same as this side right here, that would tell us that D is exactly in the middle. So that's what they're writing here. BD is congruent to segment BD is congruent to segment CD. Now look at the reason. That's the name of this chapter. This reason, you use it a lot. After you see it a couple times, you'll get the hang of when you use it. But basically, once you prove that once you state that two shapes are congruent, you could just pick the sides that correspond to each other or the angles that correspond to each other and write that they're congruent and use this as the reason. Corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent. I'll say it again. once you state that, okay, this shape is congruent to this shape, then whatever I need, like let's say I'm trying to prove something, I could just pick the sides, like for whatever I'm trying to do, I could pick the sides that correspond to each other or the angles that correspond to each other and write it here and put that as the reason in order to lead me to my final statement, which is that I proved that whatever they're asking me is true. Again, right now you may be like, huh? Give it a couple of examples and you'll start to see the pattern and see the hang of it. I'm telling you, it's simple. It's nothing to worry about. It's going to be multiple choice. After like 2 or 3 of these, you'll start to see what I'm talking about. All right, and the last thing you always write is what you had to prove. You had to prove that D is the midpoint of BC. That's always the last statement that goes there. D is the midpoint of BC, and in this case, the reason is definition. That's the definition of a midpoint. If this side equals this side, that's the definition of a midpoint. Again, it's going to be multiple choice. You'll get the hang of it, and you'll start to get it, like what goes where. Let's look at another proof. On this proof, the problem is down here. I already put the answer so we could just analyze it. And this I just copied from the previous page because we're going to refer to it here so I could just point out certain things. Okay, so the first thing that they're writing, let's look at this first. It says, given quadrilateral JKLM is congruent to quadrilateral NPQR, and they gave us 2 pieces of information. They also put angle J is congruent to angle K. So when I go to do my proof down here, look at numbers 1 and 2. Number 1 is the first thing that they gave me up here, and number 2 is the second thing that they gave me up here. So like I said, that's always the first thing you write for the statements, and the reasons you always put given, period, always, for the whole year. I just remembered I haven't said period this year, and that was a big deal last year. So there's your first time me saying period this year. All right, number 3. Hopefully you're all LOLing out there. Number 3, let's look at this, okay? So these two quadrilaterals are congruent, and they want us to prove that angle J is congruent to angle P. Okay, so first they put angle J is congruent to angle K because that's given. Angle J is congruent to angle K. Sometimes if we write on this, it makes it a little easier to visualize. Okay, now let me use a different color here real quick. Okay, now it says here that angle K is congruent to angle P. Well, that makes sense because they're both the second letter. It says here that this quadrilateral is congruent to this quadrilateral. So that means that angle K has to be congruent to angle P because they're both the second letter in the names of these quadrilaterals. Okay? And for the reason, again, look what they put. Corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent. If you read it slowly, word for word, and think about it, it makes sense. Once we establish that these 2 figures are congruent, then that means that their corresponding parts have to be congruent. Their corresponding parts means the letter that goes in this one with the letter in the other one, or the side in this one that goes with the side in the other one. That's the reason you would put. Okay, now look at the last thing that they wrote to prove that angle J is congruent to angle P. Let me try that again. Angle J is congruent to angle P. I said angle J is congruent to angle P. It's been a long day. All right, so okay, so let me use some colors here to show you something. Look, here's angle J, right? And notice that they both have the same angle right here. And I'm using the same colors I used earlier when I talked about this. So look, if angle J equals angle K, and that same angle, angle K, is congruent to angle P, that means the first one has to be congruent to the last one, and that is the transitive property, which I mentioned earlier, that comes up a lot. Okay? This first one has to be congruent to this last one if they're both congruent, if they both have this angle in common that they're congruent to. And that's always the transitive property. In this one, it was kind of easy to tell if you, I know I have like I drew a bunch of stuff here, but if you just look right here, it should be easy to tell. But sometimes they'll write them like on purposely, like they'll put this one on the top and this one on the bottom to try to confuse you. I wouldn't worry about that just yet, but that is possible. I have seen it before. So you do have to watch out for that. But I'm just giving you a heads up. So far, everything here, the given is on every question, on every proof, I should say. This gets used a lot on a ton of proofs. Corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent, so get used to it. And the transitive property one comes up a lot as well. All right, let's see. I think might have another example. Okay, this might be the last example. Let's take a look. All right, the answer is already here in red. So first of all, it says given that triangle SVT is congruent to triangle SWT, they want you to prove that segment ST bisects angle VSW. Bisects means that it goes through the middle, through the exact middle of angle VSW. I want to just reiterate what I said earlier, that these are going to be simple. It's not like you're going to look at the question and have to come up with all the answers from scratch. It's going to be multiple choice for each box, and it'll guide you. Most of the problems, it guides you, the computer program guides you through it. So this is nothing to be worried about. After you see more of these, you'll start to get the hang of it. Okay, so like I said before, the first thing you always write is the given information. That's always the first thing that you write over here. Now, once we establish that these two triangles are congruent, okay, we could start picking out, since we're trying to prove that this segment right here, segment ST, is going through the middle. Well, then it makes sense that if we could show that this angle right here, I'm purposely drawing it a little bit off so you can see what I'm drawing. Is if we could show that that angle is equal to this angle right here, then that would prove that this line has to be the bisector because it's splitting it in two equal angles. And that's what they're doing in line 2. They're saying that angle VST is congruent to angle WST. Why? Because the corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent. When you think about it, these are both angle S. Angle S up here has to be congruent to angle S. They both have the same vertex. There's a word we haven't mentioned in a few classes, but they both have the same vertex. Angle VST is congruent to angle WST. Therefore, on the last line, you write what you proved. Segment ST bisects angle VSW, because that is the definition of angle bisector. Here's one more proof where they're telling you quadrilateral ABCD. And by the way, I don't know why this is how it came out in the book. That B is really far away from where it should be, and that F should be over here. But anyways, quadrilateral ABCD is congruent to quadrilateral EFGH. And they want you to prove that segment AD is congruent. Segment AD is congruent to segment GH, which is down here. Okay, so first of all, you write the given information that the two quadrilaterals are congruent, and they also gave us here that segment AD is congruent to segment CD. So those are the two pieces of given information. Now, right, so far the proofs are all following a similar pattern. It's not going to be like that. It's just for this chapter, they're all following the similar pattern to get you used to it. Okay, so AD is congruent to CD. Let me use a different color here real quick. AD so they're saying that this side AD is congruent to segment DC. Okay, now on the second on line 3, they're saying, well, this side right here, CD, is congruent to this side over here, GH. How do we know that? Because CD is the third and the fourth letter there, and GH is the third and the fourth letter there, and we know that once you establish that one figure is congruent to the other figure, their corresponding parts also have to be congruent. Corresponding parts of congruent figures are congruent. Once they establish that this side equals this side, okay, now if you look at it carefully, it's again going to be the transitive property because they both have this one in common. Side AD is congruent to side CD, and that same one, side CD, is congruent to side GH. Therefore, the first one has to be congruent to the last one over here. And that's the transitive property, which comes up a lot. So again, learn to recognize that pattern because you're going to see it a lot. That concludes today's lesson. The assignment 3.3 is in the student portal. Your test is coming up soon, so make sure you do these homework assignments because we're going to be reviewing for the exam soon. And the homework is due by 6 a.m. the next day that you have my class.